Well, for more on EU restrictions, we're now joined by Shona Murray, who's live for us in Brussels. So, Shona, the EU's measures that they've now signed off on, they're targeting some pretty high-level individuals within Putin's inner circle. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right. They were formally agreed today, as we mentioned there, over 300 members of the Russian State Duma, Russian banks and so on. But remember, this is the first level of sanctions that relates to the Russian recognition of breakaway states. Tomorrow night, there's an emergency summit of EU leaders. All 27 member states will be represented to discuss essentially what's next if and when there is further invasion of Ukraine. I'm joined now by Bruno Lette, who's an expert, a security expert with the German Marshall Fund. Bruno, these sanctions are the first round. Do you think they'll make any impact, and what happens after that?
Well, we clearly see that the sanctions today are, much more significant, for instance, what was on the table in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. So the sanctions that we see now aim at three specific things. First of all, it's about preventing anyone to do business with the self-proclaimed republics of Luhansk and Donetsk and effectively isolating this territory economically. That's one. Number two, we see that Russian banks are being targeted, those banks that help to refinance Russian sovereign debt. That might make it harder for Russia to finance a war campaign, basically. And third, we see that a series of individuals around Putin have been targeted with asset freezes and travel bans. Now, this is significant, but these are not yet the sanctions that will cripple Russia economically. We see that the West has adopted a gradual approach, keeping options in reserve in case Putin decides to further escalate.
And what happens next if he does? I mean, we know that there's a bit of concern over whether the unity that we've seen so far can be maintained, particularly where these sanctions hit specific countries.
Well, it's quite obvious that, if Putin escalates, that the West also will need to escalate its own sanctions. So the measures will have to be harsher. And the harsher the measures towards Russia are, we also need to be prepared in Europe or in the West to take our own costs. The problem here is that will Europe remain united? So far, the EU has remained united on this, but if things get really serious, we know that there are some member states that have some concerns when it comes to energy supplies or capital markets. So this is really the $1 million question. When things get really serious, will the EU remain united?
And what can we expect or hope for in terms of Vladimir Putin's reaction to these sanctions, in terms of them being a deterrent?
Well, we see that, Russia has probably been prepared for some of these sanctions. We also know that Russia is prepared to take a cost for its own behavior. Right now, an important element is also to know that Russia's national sovereign wealth fund is at a record high, estimated at roughly $171 billion. So Russia has also effectively created a financial cushion, if I may say so, a war chest with which it could buy the time. So really, the question is, will the current sanctions be enough to change Russia's behavior, knowing that Russia is willing to take a cost? That is the question.
Okay, Bruno Lette, thank you very much for joining us.